Hi, and welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm the host of this podcast. My name is Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about power, energy, innovation, and politics. My guest today is Eric Meyer, the founder and executive director of Generation Atomic. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, thank you so much. Great to be here.
So Eric and I are going to talk about his organization, Generation Atomic, and in particular about rallying the younger people to the cause of atomic energy. Eric, we've known each other for a while, and I've heard plenty of introductions. I'd prefer to have people introduce themselves. So if you don't mind, just give us the quick, I don't know, we don't have a hard time limit here. 30 seconds, 45 seconds. I don't have a watch on. Just go ahead. Tell us who you are.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Eric Meyer, originally from a small town in southwestern Minnesota, very windy place, sometimes called the Saudi Arabia of wind, which I think is hilarious. Also a place that's done quite well because of ethanol subsidies. So maybe we can get into that later. I originally thought maybe I was going to be a music teacher. Then for a while, I thought maybe a professional singer. I actually did sing professionally for a little bit. And then it became clear to me that we probably had enough opera singers in the world, and maybe we needed a few more advocates for nuclear technology. So I started this nonprofit called Generation Atomic in late 2016, and I've been advocating for nuclear ever since.
And you live in Minneapolis?
I do, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I do want to come back to Minnesota because I've been very interested in the battles over wind energy siting, in particular in Freeborn County. And so I'm sure you're familiar with that. I want to talk about Generation Atomic, but also since I met you, I have a niece who's an opera singer. Tell me what are your favorite operas? Who are your favorite composers?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anybody can write a better melody than Puccini, probably. And Johnny Schicchi is probably my favorite in terms of, it just doesn't suffer the same problems that many operas have in terms of being too long, being too boring, being sexist in various ways. It holds up. It's just a really funny little story with some great tunes in it. So probably that one. But I love some of the really large, ambitious pieces as well. Like I've sang the Toreador and Carmen a few times, and the music is so beautiful in that opera. Even though, in abstraction, you take your back away and think about the story. You go, I don't know if that really holds together, but
right, yeah,
we'll forget about that.
Gotcha. And you're trained as a tenor.
I'm a bass baritone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of right in between, the bass and baritone. I can tell you my secondo passaggio is a D4 if you want to get really technical about it. Okay. But it's a nice versatile voice type, and I'll be able, if I want to get back into opera, I'll be able to, play villains well into my 60s and 70s if I want to.
Okay. But with Generation Atomic, you're trying to play the good guy. You are playing the good guy in addressing climate. So you mentioned Generation Atomic. You started in 2016. Now tell me where you are with the organization. You're not a 501c3?
We are a 501c3. We also have a 501c4 arm, which is called Gamma, Generation Atomic Movement Mobilizing Alliance, which is perhaps, I don't know, the greatest acronym ever for a nuclear nonprofit. Gamma allows us to get involved with specific pieces of legislation, to make endorsements of politicians that support nuclear energy. So it gives us a little more versatility in terms of our advocacy. Generation Atomic, the C3 part, is wholly dedicated to the educational and kind of advocacy capacity building aspects of nuclear advocacy. So we run educational programs. We've done advocacy trainings at the national labs. We make a lot of creative social media to get the word out. It's all about getting more people interested in nuclear and then giving those people the tools to spread that message in their own communities.
Well, so as you say that, I have to ask this. Well, how successful have you been? How do you rate your success then in something that is, mean, it's the energy landscape is enormous, and the issues around nuclear they're local, they're countywide, statewide, they're national, they're international. How do you give yourself a letter grade, or how do you judge success in something like this?
You know, probably more harshly than I should, considering the scale of the challenge and how hard this is. You know, pushing up against 40 years of stigma and dogma, and even today misinformation about this energy source is so hard. It's changing. You really can't change people's minds. I think, like, you can't force people to change their minds. You just have to kind of lead them right up to it and let them take the final step, as it were. I think we've had some successes in kind of reframing the debate in certain areas at certain times, but for me, it's never fast enough. It's never good enough. You know, we've seen several nuclear closures this year, Indian Point, Fessenheim, Phillipsburg, so much clean energy just thrown away, gone down the drain decades before its time. So every time something like that happens, Dwayne Arnold, I didn't even mention, you know, you can't even say them all. This year's been so hard for nuclear. But you know, every time something like that happens, it feels like a big failure. And you know, I have to like try not to beat myself up too much about it, and just get up, you know, dust yourself off and keep pushing. And you know, hopefully at some point we start to see more of these plants being saved and continuing to operate for years and years. We've had a few wins. You know, we're really active in Ohio. We sent almost 10,000 postcards to legislators there in support of a bill to save the nuclear plants called the Zero Emissions Nuclear Bill. This is in 2017. And though that didn't get passed, there was a bill that did get passed recently called HB 6, which has been just mired in controversy, as you might have seen.
Yes.
And I think that underscores the importance of doing things the right way, of actually making the argument to the people and getting the people to make that argument to their elected officials that we need these power plants, that they're good for the environment, good for the economy, good for energy reliability. Because if you do it the other way, you're gonna find, you know, repeal measures, and you're gonna get a lot of pushback.
Well, let me follow up on that, because you mentioned Ohio, and now just a few weeks ago, Exelon announced that they were going to close 2 of their big nuclear plants in Illinois. What are they? Oh, it's Byron and Dresden.
Yeah.
Right, and I did the calculations on those 2 plants. 34 terawatt hours of electricity per year. That's more than twice the output of all solar and wind in Illinois. And now Exelon is saying, well, we're going to close them unless the state does something, and unless the state essentially gives us some payments for keeping these plants open. So, I mean, I thought about this quite a lot, and it's difficult to have a bake sale for Exelon, right? I mean, you know, to tell people you should pay extra for this, but people are used to this idea, though, of tax credits for wind and solar. They get the hefty subsidies. So how do you do that then, especially now with some of the scandal around the Ohio nuclear plants? I mean, aren't you back-footed a little bit here? And how do you respond when you say, well, look at all this corruption in Ohio around this? I mean, this now in particular, it seems like it's a more difficult sale. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong at all. The nuclear industry hasn't done us any favors as activists. There's a bill called the CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which, you know, the end goal is 100% renewable by 2050, which
and I'm sorry, and CEJA was where? I'm sorry, where was this bill?
It's the Clean Energy Jobs Act in Illinois. And it has a large coalition around it. The important part is it's 100% clean energy by 2030. So that at least gives us some more time to fix these broken energy markets.
Clean electricity in the
clean electricity,
okay,
yeah.
by 2030, which is only 10 years. I mean, that's really aggressive given the scale of the challenge in any state, much less Illinois. It's have a large population. So anyway, but let me ask that question again. So, I mean, how do you make that argument then that Exelon or First Energy needs additional funding to keep the plants open? I understand from their point of view, they're saying, look, if we're going to produce zero carbon electricity, we need to be compensated for it, just like the wind guys are. But how do you reply?
Well, To Exelon's credit, and it's weird that there's been reporting the opposite of this, but to their credit, they've said to any lawmaker, you can come look at our books. This is what we're missing in terms of being made whole from what we could have made if we would generate this power from gas or whatever else. This is what we need to do to keep our shareholders happy.
Right.
I think the employees at Exelon and a lot of the leadership there want to see these plants continue operating. They believe in nuclear as a technology. They care about climate change, but because it's a private business or a publicly traded business, I should say, right. They are beholden to their shareholders to make the right economic moves. And when you're up against a market that doesn't value clean, reliable electricity, they're kind of backed into a corner. Unfortunately, but my argument to our advocates for them to take action and our suggested argument for them to contact their elected officials with is look, these things are the crown jewels of clean energy production in our state, and closing them down, they will be replaced almost entirely with fossil generation. It'll set us back decades in terms of our climate progress. And even if you were going to replace them with clean electricity, like wind or solar, you're talking like I crunched the numbers too. You're talking about 3,800 3-megawatt wind turbines. That's just to put that into perspective. That is, I put it in. Here we go. Eiffel Tower equivalents. That's 955 Eiffel Towers worth of steel.
I like that. Yeah.
That's the solar number. You can cut that out. That's 196 Eiffel Towers worth of steel.
For the wind turbines.
For the wind, yeah. Solar is close to 1,000 Eiffel Towers of steel.
Right. So, but I guess the other part of that, and that what a lot of what my work has lately focused on is the land use issue, and even could you even build that much? And that's the part where the nuclear industry has this installed advantage. You don't have to build more transmission lines. But again, that's a difficult sell to the public, right? And making them understand this is not just saying we like nuclear and we want more nuclear. It's we have to provide a carve out for this company, which now in the wake of the scandal with First Energy in Ohio, that's a difficult message. But let me come back to that, because you mentioned these two words, stigma and dogma, around nuclear. What are those? What are the? Give me the opponent's argument, and then just a quick refutal of that, or a rebuttal to that. What do they see? What do you see as their strongest arguments?
Their strongest arguments. They might point. I think their strongest argument right now is probably the time it takes to build a new nuclear plant, and the economics of building that plant. And these arguments, while they might hold some water in the US and some other countries in Western Europe in the year 2020, they don't hold water if you go back to the 1970s, or they don't hold water if you go to different parts of the world. So it's not an axiom that nuclear is too slow and too expensive. We have made policy decisions and unfortunate business decisions over the last 5 decades that have made that the case, and those aren't reversible, or they aren't not reversible, I guess. We can change these things, and there are a lot of companies that are trying to do this, investors and people in the government, elected officials that are trying to make those changes right now. It's just it's a long process, and it's we want results quickly. And I get that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and so I didn't ask this at the beginning. So how old are you now, Eric?
32.
Gotcha. And you started this in your late 20s.
Yeah.
And this, as you point out, the government process here is one that is lengthy, and therein seems one of the other big hurdles, in addition to telling people, okay, well, we need to support these big companies who own these big reactors because of the jobs, right? In Illinois, these are a lot of union jobs. And it's a big test for the Democrats in Illinois, because the Democratic Party just came out with their platform for the first time in 48 years saying we're in favor of nuclear. but they need governmental support, and that's the other big hurdle, isn't it? I mean, and not just that you need policy out of Washington, but you need that support at the state level as well. And so you have to have a national strategy and a state strategy to how do you think about that in terms of priorities, or is it all everything all together all at once?
Yeah, that's a great question. We support both federal action on nuclear. There's a lot of bills we've been sending emails to our elected officials about over the last several years. We were in early and often and hard on things like NEMA, the Nuclear Energy Innovation Modernization Act, NELA, Nuclear Energy Leadership Act, which looks like a pretty good possibility for at least important pieces of to be included in a upcoming energy and infrastructure package, and other bills that have worked to modernize the way we do regulations, to put more money towards research and development. That's pretty much been all advanced nuclear, though, and that's been like the main kind of bipartisan thing. There hasn't been a lot of federal action today. There's been bills introduced, none passed, that have incentivized continued operation of today's nuclear plant, of real nuclear plants.
Right.
It's a lot of support for the paper reactors of the future, but we need some support for the ones that are actually, generating 55% of our clean electricity right now. On a state level, I don't think that the state Democratic parties have really noticed that the National Democratic Party has done a 180 on nuclear here. Certainly haven't in my state of Minnesota, where there's still a ban on any nuclear construction. I'm a member of we have the DFL here for ridiculous reasons, but it's the same as the Democratic Party, but Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And I'm a member of the Environmental Caucus, and they still refuse to even discuss nuclear. Because written into the party platform of our state party, it says that the Democratic Party does not support nuclear energy as, quote, it is not a viable energy source. Like, how can you say it isn't viable? It's been viable for half a century or more, but that's their reasoning for not even entertaining discussion on it.
But that's the dogma part of what you mentioned earlier, right? That this is difficult to change. Took nearly 50 years for the Democrats to change their party platform, right? Individual Democrats would, Cory Booker being among them, and a few others saying, well, we're in favor of this. But it's easy to say, well, we're in favor of those in the future, but it's harder to say we are in favor of these ones right here, right now. And if they close, then we're going to have increased CO2 emissions. But let me reach back. I've got specific questions about your ideas about creative approaches to changing minds. But what was it was there a moment that made you, in terms of Generation Atomic, decide, well, this is really what I want to do? Was there, you're obviously concerned about climate change. What was that moment? Where was that? That moment where you said,
nuclear origin story.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah, there was. I mean, it's hard to say, like, if I had to boil it down to one exact moment, it would probably be in college. A friend of mine sent me a video by a Canadian person named Gordon McDowell, who I think a lot of nuclear activists can trace their lineage back to, because he made all of these amazing videos about thorium and molten salt reactors in the late 2000s, early teens, early 10s. And this video, because it was talking about a different type of nuclear reactor, my brain wasn't able to attach it to the same schema of the Simpsons with the leaky oil drums and green goo coming out. And it actually made me re-examine what I knew about nuclear energy in general, just by thinking, wow, there's a different type of reactor out there. Of course, I was 2.5, 3 years into a music degree at that point. So my way of contributing at that time was reaching out to him and offering to write some music for his next documentary project. So that was like my very first pro-nuclear activity, was writing kind of weird sci-fi music for a thorium documentary. But then, like I said, it became clear that that wasn't enough. Maybe I should sing about this. So I had been touring with a group called the Voyageurs, doing this show called The Pirates of the Carrot Bean. It's about eating healthy and exercising. And I thought, oh, maybe we can use music to change people's hearts and minds about nuclear. So I started rewriting, doing parodies of some of the arias that I learned in school. So,
So this is where we get into the creative approaches on changing minds.
Yeah, Toreador became nuclear power holds the key to universal prosperity. Like all of these things, just and
we're gonna use that clip. I guarantee you that is.
The O Sole Mio became clean power forever within our grasp. Like, and I mean, it's certainly a good way to break through people's preconceptions and get them to think again about this subject, because it's just, it's kind of one of those man bites dog moments. Like, wait, what is this? What's happening right now?
Yeah. Well, and on your website, you have this section about what do you call it? Nuclear speed dating, right? That and this idea about how you have a section about these nuclear conversation speed dating. So another creative approach. Then what is that? Yeah. What is nuclear speed dating? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's part of our advocacy trainings that we do. We find that a lot of the people that are interested in advocating for nuclear are nuclear engineers, and they largely suffer from something referred to as the curse of knowledge, where because they know so much about this subject, they can't remember what it was like not knowing about it. And so instead of kind of going in with that understanding and being able to explain it to a lay person, or I should say, rather than explain, have a conversation about it with a lay person, they maybe launch into the certain aspects that seem the most interesting to them as a person who already knows a lot about it. So kind of getting people to do these simulations and run through the motions of having persuasive, productive conversations that are actually real two-way communication, rather than talking at someone and hoping that some of it gets absorbed into their brain, which just doesn't really work.
So this training, that's part of that's your portfolio, right? You're advocating with emails and reaching out to politicians, legislators, et cetera, but you're also trying to do training with people who are in the industry to make them better advocates.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, so we just did kind of a shorter one last week with some friends at the American Nuclear Society and North American Young Generation in Nuclear. This one was specifically about how to use the latest in educational technology programs that have been kind of coming up in the age of COVID here, to make more effective classroom visits for nuclear.
So is that a slide? Is that a slide deck, or what? I mean, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I was explaining a few new tools that have come to my knowledge recently. One is called Ed Puzzle, and allows you to take any YouTube video and put questions inside of it to kind of check people's understanding. So making sure they actually heard what was said in the video a little bit before. So if they didn't, then they can rewatch that section and try to get the right answer. So that was one of them. Another one is called Pear Deck, which allows you to take any of your existing Google Slides presentations and put multiple choice questions, put a little like drag and drop, allow students to draw, all these kinds of little interactivity.
And that's called Pear Deck?
Yeah, like PEAR, like the fruit.
Okay.
Pear Deck.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it just works right on top of Google Slides. So if you already have your existing presentations, it's very easy to adapt. And then another one I'm really excited to start integrating into our advocacy trainings is called Flipgrid. And that allows you as the teacher to set up kind of a prompt and maybe a short example video of you responding to that prompt. So it could be something like, why do you think, could be something kind of thought-provoking, like, why do you think nuclear or uranium should be considered a renewable fuel? Should it or shouldn't it, and why? And getting people talking about that. Or how would you respond if somebody said, well, what about Chernobyl? And so seeing people's short video responses to that, and then having people respond to each other's videos, I think is going to be a really helpful learning tool. I haven't fully integrated yet because I just found out about it about a month ago. But I'm always trying to stay on the cutting edge of what's out there.
Sure. Well, so let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the other things that I had written down here, and you talk about it on Generation. Tell me again, what's your website? Direct us to your website.
Yeah, so it's generationatomic.org. And there you can, find kind of a case for nuclear, why nuclear is important. You can find a map of the world's nuclear power plants and which ones are currently under threat or no longer in operation. And there's also, I think, one of the most important parts of it is the Take Action page. And we're constantly adding new digital actions in Canada, the US, and Australia. And we've taken over 4,000 of those digital actions over the last couple of years. And it's pretty awesome to give people the ability to not only send an email to all their elected officials, but make a phone call to them, tweet at them as well, and give them a nice script that they can use or edit and personalize as they like.
Gotcha.
And on Twitter, politicians need to hear from their constituents on this.
Sure. So that's your website. And on Twitter, what's your Twitter handle?
It's Gen_atomic, at Genatomic.
Okay. Gotcha. So just a quick reminder, this is the Power Hungry Podcast. My guest is Eric Meyer. He's the executive director and founder of Generation Atomic. And we're talking about his group and what their nuclear advocacy efforts and the challenges that are involved in keeping nuclear plants, existing plants open, and advocating for future nuclear. So you have a video on your website. I was looking at it. You were at the COP24 meeting in Katowice in Poland. You mentioned you'd been to 4 of those meetings. Has the tenor of those changes? I'm using tenor. Has the attitude about nuclear in those COP meetings changed in the last few years? How do you see the progression of the nuclear discussion over the last few years? Has it improved? Has it gotten better? Tell me how you view that.
Yeah, it has gotten better. And I remember the very first conference of parties, COP, that I attended in Paris. It was seen as a scandal almost that there was this large pro-nuclear presence, Nuclear for Climate, that these climate scientists had come out in favor of nuclear. So that was really, that put the initial cracks in the armor, I think. And that was, to interrupt, that was Ken Caldera, James Hansen, and a couple of others, if memory serves. Who were they? Do you remember? Kerry Emanuel and Tom Wigley. Kerry Emanuel and Tom Wigley, right? Yeah. Then they had a press conference in Paris, right? That was then got a fair amount of coverage. They did, yeah. That was really the kind of climate scientists for nuclear narrative really started there, and that was, through the good work of Kirsty Gogan and Energy for Humanity. I think Robert Stone was involved in that, and the director of Pandora's Promise. Exactly. Yeah, I should probably explain that. No problem. Thank you for filling in the gaps there. Yeah, Robert Stone, and actually that conference made it into a different movie called The New Fire. And I'm also in that film, singing opera about advanced nuclear on the buses and trains of Paris in English, which I'm sure Parisians totally understood. But anyway, it helped us hand out several thousand books called The Climate Gamble, Our Anti-Nuclear Environmentalists Endangering Our Future, which is a good good book still out there. The audio book, you can listen to my dulcet tones read it if you grab it on Audible. But yeah, a good book by some Finnish authors and good friends of mine.
Raleigh Partanen and
Jana Korhonen.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, and he's got another one coming out soon, which is being edited right now, but I'm planning on doing the audiobook for that as well.
Gotcha.
So it won Science Book of the Year in Finland in 2017, I believe.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about we talked a little bit about the future technologies and different. We recently NuScale got a key approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on their light water design for their a 60 megawatt electric reactor. Oklo just submitted their application to the NRC for approval. So there's been some positive movement on next generation reactors. Advanced reactors. I don't know what how that terminology would, which one would apply to which, but why don't you handicap it for me? I know that there are a lot of different technologies out there. First, why do we need a new chemistry, right? The NuScale design is around light water, which is the design that we have most of now around the world, or almost all of now around the world deployed. And Oklo's coming up with a different design. So tell me how you view it. Which designs in your view are the most promising for this next gen of reactors that are being developed now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see different designs filling different market niches. Oklo's 1.5 megawatt reactor could be a fantastic community powerhouse for remote villages, for places cut off from roads that are currently flying in diesel fuel to generate their electricity. That's very expensive, and I think it's a good business decision to try to go after the most expensive electricity markets right now, because that's always the question, right? How much is this newfangled nuclear going to cost, and can it undersell what's already there?
Right.
So I think they have a fantastic strategy, and I'm excited to see their next designs. I think they are thinking down the road. All right, what's the after we do the 1.5 megawatt, are we going to do the 15 or the 150? I don't know, but I think that's in the works for them.
Sure. And they're using a molten salt design, right? Or for heat transfer.
I don't think Oklo is using any molten salt. I think that's for heat transfer. I know UltraSafe Nuclear is using that with their gas cooled.
Okay.
But I think
I should know this. I interviewed Carolyn Cochran already. I should know this off the top of my head. Now I'm embarrassing myself. Well, don't ask the question if you don't know. But yeah, okay. So
they have solid fuel with liquid sodium as the
liquid sodium. Okay.
Yeah. It's actually a very similar design to the first quote unquote nuclear power plant, which powered 4 light bulbs and then a building in Idaho, the experimental breeder reactor, which, by the way, there is a nice music video that I filmed there. you can watch. That's the Clean Power Forever that I referenced earlier.
And where can people see that? Is that on Generation Atomic website as well?
I think it's in there somewhere, but if you type "Clean Power Forever" into YouTube, you'll find it.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So then there's the NuScale design, which is using it's a water cooled reactor like the existing designs, but I ask it again. So if you handicap it, is there a company or technology that you think has some advantage over the other contestants right now?
I do have some thoughts about that. I'm wondering if I'm going to get in trouble by saying, but no, I think, NuScale, they are first out the gate. So I think the nuclear community writ large is rooting for them to be successful. There are issues that I see with their design. As a layperson, the size of the pool that they need to put all these reactors in is quite large. It's actually larger than any pools that currently exist. I found out recently. It's a few orders larger than Olympic swimming pools. So that's kind of a little bit of a question mark, I feel like, and that maybe hurts the ability to scale if you kind of have to decide how large your pool is going to be at the beginning.
Right.
and you can't, build extra pools later on. So that's a little bit of a question mark for me.
Sure.
I'm certainly hoping that they're successful. I like, as far as light water reactor designs, I like GE Hitachi's BWRX300. That stands for Boiling Water Reactor 10, and 300 megawatts electric, 900 thermal. That to me seems like a very streamlined design. It uses something like 90% less concrete than the earlier design that GE Hitachi made, that it's based off of, the ES-BWR, Enhanced Safety Boiling, or Economically Simplified is what they also call it, Boiling Water Reactor. So that seems like a really good fit to drop into the footprint of existing coal plants. That being said, I'm super excited for molten salt reactors that are around the corner, like terrestrial energies design. I think is really elegant and has a good business model associated with it. And having those reactors with the different chemistry allows you to have much higher temperatures. Then you're getting into decarbonizing the industrial sector and replacing gas and
because you have a way for process heat for refiners or miners or whoever else is going to need that kind of heat.
Yeah.
You mentioned terrestrial, and they're based in Canada, right? They're a Canadian company, and as I understand it, they domiciled in Canada because they thought it would offer them a faster path to licensure than they would find in the United States, which is interesting in terms of thinking about, okay, well, what's the big picture here? How are companies going to be able to build and produce a reactor? But they first have, before all of that, they have to be able to get regulators to say yes, and it has to be a credible regulator. So it's now we're really in we've been talking a lot about the United States, but really the game here is really the international market, right? In that, as I look at it, yes, these reactors could be deployed in the U.S., but the electric market in the U.S. is very fragmented. So that the electric demand in the United States is growing very, very slowly. So can you talk about I'm prompting you here. So the game is about, in climate change and CO2 emissions, sure, it's about the United States, but is it more about the developing world? I'll put it in make a question rather than a statement. Is it more about the developing world and how we get these reactors deployed in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, China, Indonesia, the Philippines? That is it fair to say that's where the bigger challenge or bigger bang for the CO2 buck is?
Oh yeah, I mean you're absolutely right, and it's really easy for us in the West to get myopic about decarbonizing the little bit that we have left here. But yeah, there's like you showed in your film, there's still 1 billion plus people living in the low watt world are really struggling, and I think that's one of the largest social and environmental justice issues in existence. But it doesn't get the same billing as a community here or there that's next to a coal plant or a refinery or something like that. But yeah, we need to keep our eyes on cleaning up those and electrifying those communities around the world. I was just doing some numbers there. I have a little global fossil fuel replacement calculator where I can kind of plug in the different reactor and make a couple guesses about how many could possibly be made at a factory per year and how many we would need. And just as an example, I took one of the reactors we actually are building pretty quickly right now, which is the Russian VVER 1200. It's a 1200 megawatt electric reactor. So if we're going to build that one and decarbonize the world's electricity that's currently generated by fossil fuels, that's just under 27,000 terawatt hours annually. And if we're going to do that, we'd need about 2,800 of those large nuclear reactors. So let's say we get started in 2030 and build them till 2050. You're looking at 138 reactors a year coming out of 46 factories. Guessing that then each factory could maybe do 3 reactors a year or something like that. Like, the numbers are astounding when you really think about it.
The numbers are incredibly large, and that's one of the things that is so daunting about thinking about this global decarbonization effort and thinking about, well, we have to start with the grid, and then we have to figure, well, right, well, let's do increments of 10 terawatt hours, right, and then work the numbers back from there. But in your view right now, then, is it the Russians, the Chinese, who in globally do you look to now that are succeeding in deploying nuclear at scale?
Yeah, you said it. It's the Russian and the Chinese, and as an American who cares about democratic values, who cares about having good jobs in this country and reliable electricity, affordable electricity, and spreading our democratic values to other countries. It's really frustrating to see how the good work that they're doing, as good as it is, to see them, starting reactor engineering programs for students coming from the sub-Saharan Africa. It's like everything that our country has done in the past with Atoms for Peace, but just got away from and just gave up the whole game. And I hope we can make a comeback, both for economic but also national security reasons. But it's going a little slower than I like it to right now.
So, in terms of your work, because much of you're focused on the broad portfolio, but is it fair to say how much of your work? I'll ask it this way: how much of your work is on college campuses, and why there? What does the campus environment give you that you don't get in other places?
Yeah, there's a lot of energy on college campuses. From January to the realities of the pandemic sunk in, we were on 4 different college campuses in Illinois, collecting petition signatures and holding events in support of continued operation of the nuclear plants there, 100% clean energy future, as we called it. And college students, they care about this. They care about the future. They have the energy and sometimes the time to devote to being an activist for this kind of thing. And I think they can be persuasive messengers to their elected officials. And it's just there's nobody else doing this work right now, or who's able to do this work. I think it's very bimodal. I've noticed our volunteers. It's like young folks that don't have kids yet, and retired folks that don't have kids, in their house anymore.
Right.
And those are kind of our 2 constituencies that can be called upon to volunteer their time and effort for this cause. And I think college students are a big piece of that.
Well, that's interesting, because is there a generation gap in the willingness to endorse nuclear? Because I'm somewhat older than you are, and when I grew up, the anti-nuclear advocacy was tied to weaponry, and it was a kind of a distrust of big government and so on. But it also seems, if you're looking at the political world today, there's a divide both in belief in climate change on a generational basis, and the generational divide on the ability of nuclear to deal with that. How do you see that, the generational divide, given that this is, that's in the name of your organization? How does the generation gap figure into nuclear politics?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Because it seems like every, if we're talking baby boomers, they had the Cold War, they had duck and cover, which is very traumatic.
There were fallout shelters in the radioactive sign fallout shelters in my elementary school in the basement.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, I'm imagining the kind of nuclear holocaust is really a traumatic moment that I think most people who experienced it haven't fully processed and gotten over it, if it really got down to it. And after that, it was 3 Mile Island, which I think a lot of Gen X folks experienced, and the immediate film that came out, what was it, 6 days before the China syndrome? It is just too weird to think about how that happened. And then for my generation, it was The Simpsons that formed public opinion around this topic. So it seems like every moment, and now, you could say the Zoomers have Fukushima to some extent. So it seems like every generation has kind of their touchstone nuclear fear moment.
The cultural defining thing of that generation, right? Yeah, that's fair to say.
And I guess I'm hoping that the larger existential threat of global climate change, plus the increased awareness of the massive societal injustice we see by people who don't have anything to plug in or anything to plug it into. I feel like the awareness is growing about that, and that is hopefully superseding some of these decades old dogmas that we have.
Right. So radioactivity, it's something you talk about on your website as well, that it's scary to people, right? If we think about, well, what are the concerns, right? We talked earlier about development costs of new reactors. We talked about the length of time to deploy new reactors. That's a scale issue that, as we just talked about, the numbers are pretty daunting. But on a personal level, it seems that radioactivity is an issue for people because they can't see it, touch it, smell it, et cetera. How do you talk about radioactivity? How do you disabuse people of that fear? What's a millisievert? Where do you start on that to make people grasp the issue of radioactivity so that it lets them understand that it's not as dangerous as they've been told or just may mistakenly believe? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I think with a lot of our types of nuclear messaging efforts, I try to put it on a human scale that people can really visualize, they can grasp. It feels touchable to them. And for radiation, I think that's been bananas for us in many cases. And at COP23,
been bananas for us. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Go slow here.
Right. At COP23, we purchased about, I think it was like 200 pounds of bananas from local supermarkets in Germany, and lugged them into the conference area where the expo is happening early in the morning before anybody had gotten there. And we had all these bananas stickered up with a sticker that said something like, good morning, today your breakfast is brought to you by Nuclear for Climate. Did you know that this banana is more radioactive than living within I think it was a 5-kilometer radius of a nuclear power plant for a year? And then we handed them out every single expo table all over the place, and we got a lot of visitors to our booth that day. Some people were confused, thinking that we had irradiated the bananas, and then their minds were blown further when we explained that most produce is actually irradiated, so it doesn't have various pathogens on it before it gets to the supermarket.
So were you able to put a millisievert number on the banana? Whereas I've never heard of the banana technique before, but that's interesting.
Yeah, it's the banana. Gosh, I want to just double check here. I think it's 0.01 or 0.1 millisieverts. I didn't want to give you the wrong number.
But the point that you were making was that, correct me if I'm wrong, radioactivity is all around us, and here's a common thing that you see all the time, that it's radioactive, and yet you don't think about that. Is that so? You're using the banana as a teachable and edible moment, I guess would be.
Exactly. Yeah, because there's potassium-40 is a radioactive element in every single banana. There's a lot in our body constantly. We actually, we need these minerals to survive. But there's this kind of conception of radiation, and that even the smallest amount is bad for you and can give you a chance of getting cancer. And there's literally no data to back that up.
So the radioactivity is one issue. Then is there and cost, time to build, but is it also just that renewables have gained this natural kind of patina, right? Oh, well, it's the wind and the sun, and therefore they must be better. Is that part of the allure as well, or how do you see the marketing around renewables, and why has it been more successful than other forms of energy? How do you see that?
Yeah. I mean, they are seen as kind of harmonizing with nature, the natural flows of nature. And there's very little awareness of the mining intensity required to produce these technologies, and how much land that is needed, and who has to what kind of environmental sacrifices we have to make to put these things up. Where was it productive farmland? Was it, previously a forest that animals lived in that we just clear cut to make room for these things? There's very little awareness of the environmental invasiveness of some of these. So they are benefiting from that perception of it being natural, and it's a tough one to cut through. And I've found that leading with the fact that something that somebody likes, like wind and solar, is actually not good, and is a good way to close people off to what you're going to say next. Anytime somebody feels attacked like that, they're going to think of every single reason why they shouldn't believe you and why they're not wrong. Because nobody likes to feel like they're wrong. They can maybe feel like they were misled potentially, because that kind of puts the blame on somebody else. But you can't attack somebody and expect them to change their mind.
So, well, let's talk about your case in Minnesota, because you're born and raised there, and there's a lot of controversy around, in particular, around wind projects in Minnesota. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the main controversy that I see, and maybe you might know more about this as far as land use issues. I'm kind of drawing a blank on like land use disputes. I know there have been some issues as far as migratory birds are concerned.
But Freeborn County, I know there's litigation now over a project that's being pushed in Freeborn County. But if that's not your area, I
gotta read up on that one. I haven't heard that recently. But to me, the wind and solar related controversy is around the precious metals mining in northern Minnesota near the boundary waters, which are a very sacred place for me. I love going canoeing, fishing, camping up there, and just adjacent there's really some of the best copper and nickel deposits in the country, and some say in the world. And there have been various mining companies that have been trying to get in there and make that and extract those minerals. And I think in the environmentalists have a very justified position in not wanting to potentially expose this beautiful boundary waters area to copper nickel sulfide mining techniques, which can be terrible for water quality. And I think they have a really good point. Of course, it's all of these same people who are against nuclear and want to do 100% renewable electricity future. And it's like they don't connect the dots of where the minerals for those technologies come from. People make that connection.
So is that part of that must be the key challenge then? You're trying to make this personal then for people to grasp those kinds of issues. Is that one of the techniques that you use then? How do you make that personal connection then? Because that's ultimately the thing that makes people change their minds and take action, right?
Yeah, it is. The kind of jargony way that organizers talk about it is having values alignment, making sure that the person you're talking to, you actually see each other as people, rather than a talking head or some kind of objective, a target to persuade. But you understand what this person cares about so you're asking a different type of question, which is more along the lines of like, when did you first realize you're an environmentalist? Or have you noticed any climate impacts from in your neighborhood? And kind of sharing stories about how you're really the same, and you have a lot of the same hopes and aspirations and cares for the environment. And then you can get into the topic of the energy decisions that we're making.
Sure. Well, so we're coming around an hour, and I don't, I like to keep these episodes at about that length. I want to ask you a few other just questions about, given that you've dedicated yourself to the issue of climate change and nuclear and informing people. Who are your heroes? Who do you look to as leaders on these kinds of things? And you know, it could be musical heroes or personal heroes, but I'm just curious how, you know, who are the examples that you want to emulate?
Yeah, man, that's a good one. You know, a hero of mine for a long time has been a scientist and the director of Oak Ridge National Lab, a guy by the name of Alvin Weinberg, and he and I are very much lockstep in our view that the problems that we're facing today in terms of climate change, in terms of just scarcity in general of resources, are largely a choice that society has made, most likely unknowingly, and can be fixed by a technological means. And you know, that's something that gives me hope, knowing that humans have been smart enough to come up with the technology we need to provide for everyone, and not hurt the environment, and keep the environment pristine, keep nature, you know, keep that habitat out there for the animals that need it. And he saw the work that he did in developing new types of reactors and trying to make them, you know, passively safe, because he saw the potential blowback from any type of accident, whether or not anybody was even hurt. He saw that coming decades before anybody else did, and a decade before 3 Mile Island. But it was hard for him to persuade the powers at the time that we should be pursuing some other reactor designs at the same time. So he's a big hero of mine for seeing how mankind, through our inventiveness, could provide for the world. So you know, I try to carry his message forward and help achieve, as he would call, the second nuclear era. So he's a big one. And then, you know, these climate scientists that have had the courage to come out, like James Hansen and others, courage to come out in support of nuclear, who have lost funding as a consequence, they are big heroes of mine too. Anybody who looks at a personal sacrifice in order to support this technology is like a hero in my book.
That's great. And so what about, what are you reading now? Are you reading novels? What do you do when you're not working on these issues? What do you like to read? What is your go-to novelist or go-to author? Who do you like?
Gosh, I actually can't remember the last fiction book I read. It's been several years.
No problem.
But typically I'm reading 3 books at a time. One is on the science of communication. So for me right now, somebody recommended this one to me by Alan Alda. It's If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face?
Uh-huh.
You know, he's an actor and master of improvisation, and worked some of that into science communications.
Uh-huh.
Then I'm always reading some kind of climate book. Before it was Uninhabitable Earth, and I just started digging into this Mark Linus 6 Degrees of Climate Emergency.
Is that Linus's new book? Is that the one that just came out? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's the update to the 2007. And then I always like to read some kind of nuclear book. So that right now is, and I see my green screen's having fun with this book, Atomic Accidents, is written with a really good sense of humor about it's actually, the writing is very dramatic but also humorous at times about the various accidents, and he is coming from like, look, this is the worst that it ever was and ever conceivably could be, still wasn't that bad. Like look at this hydro accident, it's way worse.
So that's interesting. So comparing the results at Chernobyl or Fukushima with other accidents that are industrial or energy related. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
And I should say, I didn't mention this, but your book was also excellent. And if anybody listening hasn't read A Question of Power yet, So good. But mine's dog-eared like crazy, filled with highlights, and I refer back to it often.
Okay.
So.
Well, that prompt was not designed to come back to
I know,
me, but nevertheless, I like to ask that question because, I just think it's interesting to see what, hear what people are doing. You have not clued me in on the green screen. That's a nuclear plant behind you you said that's in Belgium. What's the name of that plant?
It's called Tiange, and it's 3 gigawatts, always on nuclear power. It's another one of these plants that's scheduled for early closure, ridiculously through political pressure in the EU, and it's another one of those potential wins that the pro-nuclear movement could make in the next couple of years if we work hard enough, and we should, and future generations would thank us.
So last question then for you, Eric Meyer with Generation Atomic. So you've been working at this for a while, and earlier you talked about, being kind of depressed or deflated at different, inability to move the needle in some cases. So what gives you hope? What keeps you optimistic in this effort that you've now devoted yourself to for 4 years? What makes you hopeful?
Yeah, well, the constant growing nature of our movement gives me a lot of hope. This month there's Stand Up for Nuclear events in over 40 cities. So many friends and allies taking the action to actually, host something in their areas. I love seeing that, and knowing that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. Like there is an actual way that we could rapidly, deeply decarbonize the world and provide everyone the energy they need if we made the right decisions. That keeps me going. And if the math is very daunting, but it's not impossible. So knowing that there is actually, like, we have a chance, and that there's a lot of people that support that, and it's growing constantly, gives me a lot of hope.
Good. Well, that's a good way to draw to a close. Any final thoughts? Any other things that you wanted to bring up, Eric, that we didn't hit on here?
Let's see. Well, I should probably say it one more time. GenerationAtomic.org.
Very good.
You can put a /take-action in there if you want, or click the take action button. There are various pro-nuclear actions that you can take in 3 different countries and various states. Things, even contacting the NRC about various issues regarding the size of the emergency planning zones for SMRs, more wonky stuff, and then more kind of general support for the technology. And then when you take action, we'll send you an email, give you the option to subscribe to our email list if you like, or attend advocacy trainings or future virtual events for now that we're having. So it's a good way to get plugged in. To anybody who does that, and anybody who's cares about making the world a better place, I salute you and welcome you to the nuclear movement.
Great. All right. Well, Eric Meyer, the founder and executive director of Generation Atomic. Thanks a million for being on the Power Hungry podcast. All of you out there, thank you for tuning in. If you want to see or hear other episodes, go to powerhungrypodcast.com. That will direct you to all of the episodes that we've done. Thanks again, Eric, and thanks to all of you for listening, and tune in the next time for another episode of the Power Hungry podcast.